The alien queen from Aliens. Who doesn't love her? A classic monster design from a classic action movie created by a classic director. The Beast herself designed by that classic director in a classic action movie. What do you get when you mix that design together with someone like me who has too much free time on his hands? A homemade full-sized statue of her. This video will be explaining basically how I made her, how I got the ideas for some of the materials, how she materialized, how it was like to create a beast like this. At her core, this queen alien is made up of foam boards and plaster strips. I first used these materials on the Predator costume that I made, but then I had a few small projects where I made a T-Rex head and a Velociraptor. I made those basically by taking the foam boards and kind of making a skeleton out of them, cutting them up and using hot glue to glue pieces together to form a skeleton, which I would then be able to cover with plaster strips, which would make it really hard and sturdy and have a solid surface, and I'd be able to paint that and it would be able to look pretty good. I did a lot of research for this before I started. I went through the movies, watched her scenes. I took a lot of screen captures to get accurate photo reference to be able to follow throughout the project. Whenever I could, I tried to take image reference for details based off of either the movie itself or the behind the scenes pictures of the actual models that they used to create her. The queen is made up of 12 pieces. Her head and her torso is a single piece. Her arms are separate pieces. Her smaller arms are separate. Her legs, her tail, and her back spines, and her inner mouth are separate pieces, which all take about 5 minutes to put together in the final assembly, which you can see here. I actually had to have 2 people. I had to have my sister helping to support it while I put the legs on. Any part of the figure would basically start with a basic shape cutout of the outline of the part out of foam board. And especially for the legs and the torso that needed to be really strong, I double reinforced those basic outlines with 2 layers of foam boards. And then I just kind of flesh out the skeleton from there, give it shape, cut different pieces of foam board to be able to fill out the shape so that when I put the plaster strips on top of it, it'll keep its shape and be as smooth as I can get it. And that's the most difficult part of using the plaster strips. And then after making the skeleton, I would put the plaster strips on it. And then after I put the plaster strips on it to smooth it out a little bit, I would just take some plaster of Paris mixed with water, take a paintbrush and kind of brush that over the top to kind of get rid of the spotted plaster cloth texture that would be on it after the initial plaster strips coating. And then after that, I would take some Mod Podge, kind of a clear glossy sealer, and then paint that over the surface for extra protection, but also for the glossiness, because the queen alien needs to be very shiny, so that stuff worked well. And then after that, I could spray paint it. Luckily, the color scheme of the queen was pretty simple, just a solid base of black with little highlights of blue here and there. Looking at the final product, those little highlights of blue here and there really do add a lot to the way she looks when she photographs. And you definitely understand why James Cameron decided to have her color scheme like that. And because the materials I use are so light, the entire figure weighs in at about 50 pounds. She is a full 9.5, 10 feet tall and about 14 feet long. Various sources have said that the queen alien is supposed to be 14 feet tall, but you can see in the movie she fits into that elevator, and that elevator is only like 8 feet tall, so yeah, she's still full-sized. It was interesting to try to work out weight issues with a statue of this size. I eventually decided on making the legs pretty sturdy, but also having a support on the front side of the figure ended up going under the neck. I made it out of PVC pipe, and also after adding some pieces of wood to the bottom of her feet for extra strength because her feet are so small. That combined with the base, she ends up being really sturdy and she stands pretty well by herself. The teeth were a very interesting challenge on this. The queen's teeth are semi-transparent, which was a very specific detail I wanted to make sure that I was able to put into this. So I went through a couple of methods, including trying to somehow cast and mold some hot glue or resin in some sort of a cast made out of clay, but none of them ever turned out very smooth or clean. Eventually, what I settled on that ended up working, they are made out of hot glue sticks, which I then took a wood burning tool with a X-Acto knife blade end on it and was able to kind of carve them and shape them into teeth, which was good. It made them clear and transparent, and they just look really good, and they were really fairly cheap to make. And then after making those teeth, I kind of made a support of gums made out of air dry clay, which goes around both sides of them. And then I was able to use some hot glue to glue those gums with the teeth onto those jaws. Her tendons on her jaws were interesting to make. Initially, I was thinking I was just going to use plastic wrap and just kind of stretch that, but when I did it, it didn't look right. So I decided, since it was right next to the plastic wrap, maybe I'd try some wax paper. And just the wax paper by itself looked pretty good, but it needed a little bit of texture and stretchiness to it. So I took some hot glue and put that on top, smoothed it out a little bit. And then after putting that on, it ends up looking really good. It has the stretchy, wrinkly texture of those tendons, and it's semi-transparent, just like it should be, and it's really fantastic. The claws on the hands are just made out of clay, attached on with half a toothpick into the foam core at the end of the fingers, and then painted white afterwards. The queen's tail was made by starting out with a base of 2 water weenie noodles, which I then kind of attached together and put a long dowel rod on one end that would be able to attach into the torso. Took those, covered them with some plaster strips for initial strength and shape, cut slots into them for enough for, see, there are 44 spines on her tail, and each spine had 3 pieces of foam board that were cut and sliced into it, so 132 individual pieces of foam board shapes were cut and inserted into that tail, and then again all covered with plaster strips to get the final shape. And the spine at the end of the tail comes with a pull apart torso stabbing action. I just need some milk and yogurt spurting out of my mouth. While I was working on this project, the basement did end up looking like quite a bit of a mess. I have made some pretty good-sized messes in the basement before, but this one was about as big as all of those messes put together. This project I made kind of as a bigger thing towards the end of the summer, something that would really be a good challenge for me, but also be something that if I did it as well as I thought I would be able to, it would end up being something that I could actually be proud of by the end of it. Something that I normally wouldn't think I would be able to make, but I was able to pull through and make the entire thing, and she looks pretty cool, and she's easily one of the coolest things I've ever made. You gotta love the Queen Alien. Be on the lookout for future projects from me, more ambitious projects, hopefully more along the scale of this one. Maybe even a few projects that are loosely related to this one, maybe. Thanks for watching, and hope to be able to show some more projects similar to this in the not too distant future.